Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Home Tech Podcast. Jason Griffin here. So happy to have you with us. I am joined, as always, by my partner, Seth Johnson. Seth, how's it going?
Good, man. Good, man. I hear the thunder in the background. Sounds like you're about to get hit.
Yeah, we've got quite the storm rolling through here. I would say I feel like I'm in Florida a little bit, but I don't have any nasty dragonflies buzzing around in my studio. So
I thought it was a bird.
It looked like a bird.
Turned out to be a dragonfly. It's about the size of a small bird.
Turtles and dragonflies and the wildlife of Seth's studio.
The garage, yes.
Yeah.
It's a bit ridiculous at some point.
Well, maybe you can get your Roomba out to attack it.
Oh, I would, but I'm scared that they're going to start mapping out my garage and selling the data off.
Isn't that a crazy story? I'm not sure what to make of that one.
That's really strange. So Roomba, the CEO said kind of in an interview, I think, that he was going to, their next big deal is they've been using their little robots to go around and clean your house, but they've also been mapping your floor plan. And so they're going to go ahead and sell that map to the highest bidder. Like, they're not the highest bidder. I mean, that's kind of like the Gizmodo headline to kind of reel you in and see what the heck is going on here. They're just going to sell that data off, and it'll be part of how they make money for their company. I saw there was an interesting use case for this, but I'm trying to scroll through the article and see what it was. But I don't know. I think it's wasn't it Mike Wolf? I think Mike Wolf was talking about this like robots. At the end of last year. That's his big prediction for the year is robots.
Robots.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I don't know. I admittedly haven't dissected this story as much as I should, and so I certainly don't want to sound like an alarmist, but it does sound a little bit weird on the surface. I suppose if that data was anonymized and it was just used to, paint a picture of what the typical home looks like or whatever, but I don't know what I can't figure out what the use case for that would be. But anyways, I was just giving you a hard time, Seth, because I knew you had a Roomba and I wasn't sure if you were going to still be using it.
Well, I only use it in the garage here to clean.
So it's got a good map of your garage.
Yeah, and like it'll have like 4 car tires or 8 car tires, depending on how many cars are parked in the garage at any given time. One of the things they have here in the article, and I don't know if it's just like hyperbole or just kind of examples of things they could do, is if they you have a big empty space, then you might need some furniture. So they'll pass that information off to a furniture manufacturer.
So it is personalized, not anonymized.
They're saying it can be, but I don't know. Roomba or iRobot is saying that no, we're not going to do that way. But the fine print isn't written up that way.
Yeah.
So we'll see where it goes. Luckily, I don't have a Wi-Fi one, and it's just a regular old dumb Roomba. So
you're good.
Yep, I should be fine.
Well, if there's anybody listening who has a better handle on this story than we do, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Twitter would be a good way, at HomeTech Podcast, or head on over to our website, HomeTech.fm/feedback, I believe is the best way to do that. But let's jump in here. We got a really great show. We've reinitiated our project. Again, we want to thank everybody who submitted one of those, and we are working through that list. So if we haven't gotten that, haven't reached out to you, that doesn't mean we've given up on you. We're like I said, going to be working through that list. But we had David Millsaps on, who's been a longtime supporter of the show, and I've had the opportunity to have a couple of really interesting conversations with on Twitter. And he submitted a really great entry and had a really good time chatting with him and learning about the home. And David's got a really, I think, a valuable perspective, because he's not an industry professional, but he's very clearly somebody who's done his homework and really researched the options and has a pretty good handle on market trends and where this is all headed, and trying to make decisions to not sort of obsolete yourself 2-3 years into the future. And I found those insights to be really educational. So I think people are really going to enjoy that conversation. Definitely stay tuned for it.
Yeah, I think he's done a really good job of doing his research. I mean, much more than I would have done had I not been actually in the industry, kind of doing the same research, to basically sell the right product for the right client. But he really buckled down, crossed all his T's, dotted all his I's, got a couple things, wrong, I guess, here and there, but not wrong. Like he's since corrected them and made a better system out of it because of those learning. You learn along the way what you do, and he definitely sounds like he has a system that he likes and his family's grown to like. So it was pretty, very important. And it was a good interview. I thought it went really well.
Yep. So stay tuned for that. As we usually do, we are going to hit a number of news stories here. But before we do that, we've got a great pick of the week. We're going to talk about here in a second, but I want to quickly send a big thank you out to all of our patrons, supporters of the show. We really, really appreciate it. If you're interested in learning about how you can support our efforts here at the HomeTech Podcast, head on over to HomeTech.fm/support. Once again, that's HomeTech.fm/support. And you can become a patron of the show, which means you can support us for as little as $1 a month. We've got a bunch of people doing that now. We really appreciate it. And I always like to mention, even at that $1 a month level, we'll send you an invite to our private Slack channel, The Hub, which has really become a very vibrant community of smart home enthusiasts and professionals. And I think people who generally just really, really get it and really enjoy the dialogue that goes on in there on a daily basis.
Yep, absolutely. I want to echo that thanks and say thanks for everybody who's also tuning in tonight. Looks like it's a little slow, and I may have scared them off with the bumper music.
Yeah,
but
it's quite possible.
K-pop, not that popular.
K-pop.
Yeah. We'll get it right one day, but
not so popular.
No. So, but this week, Jason, we've got a pretty good pick of the week.
You're doing a great job at finding these, Seth. I got it. My hat's off to you.
Well, this one's funny. Last week we did the little bird. This one is courtesy of the satirical site The Onion. Home Depot releases a new Bluetooth cordless water hose, and they've got a picture of a gentleman here watering his lawn with a hose. Of course, there is nothing on the hose except
no hose.
There's no hose. And over on the spigot, if you see down in the bottom corner, there's a spigot that has a little like antenna sticking out of it.
Funny. I didn't even notice that.
Very clever.
You just
very
said
clever.
It. I got to admit, it's funny. Somebody I know actually posted this on Facebook this week, and I quickly read the headline, and I didn't quite. Somehow I skimmed over the word cordless in there, right? And first of all, I'll mention I didn't notice right away that it was from The Onion, so that would have been a dead giveaway. But like, just for a split second, a couple of seconds, I was like, I was thinking a Bluetooth nozzle. Right. And I was like, why would you, I don't know, water usage or something? And then it didn't take me very long to look a little bit closer at the picture. And I was like, okay, I'm an idiot.
Fake news, Jason, fake news.
This is really good though. So definitely head on over to the website. Take a look at that if you want to laugh. HomeTech.fm/172 will be the URL this week. 172 shows, Seth. That's getting up there.
Wow. Yeah. And Cedia is right around the corner. We're going to have some fun stuff hopefully planned for Cedia. I know you and I are staying relatively close to the convention center, I think, this year.
Yep.
So we should be able to get in and out and do things that we need to do. And I think you're working the show this year, didn't you say?
I'm working. Yeah, this will be my first ever trade show on the vendor side. So it'll be really interesting, different perspective for sure.
Yeah, it is a very, very different show from the vendor side. I think
you last week said we talked about this briefly after we got done recording, and you said you're going to learn a lot and you're going to be really tired.
Yep. I guarantee it. You'll be tired. It's a lot of talking. I hope you have a voice left by the end of the week.
Yeah, no kidding. That's typically my struggle when I come home from CDI. I usually sound pretty rough, so this will be a whole different ball game. But
we'll have to get the show done on Wednesday night.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's jump in. We've got a couple of stories here. We want to start out with a new entrant into the mesh Wi-Fi, or Seth, as you like to call it, the Wesh MiFi.
Yeah, so a little slip of the tongue before the show, and yes, Wesh MiFi is coming.
It's a new category. It's totally different from mesh Wi-Fi.
So this company, Asus, has announced. They announced this early in January. I know we covered it. We talked about it a little bit. It's a product called HiveSpot. It was a mesh Wi-Fi system, pretty much like everything else. And we talked about them releasing it. They have rebranded it to Lyra. which I think was probably the best move that they could have made. Yeah.
Good move.
Lyra's a 3-pack of tri-band 802.11ac mesh routers with max speeds of 2,134 megabits per second.
Wow.
You really need
Precise.
that 34. Yeah, exactly. It's very important that you get that. Even though your internet speeds may not be that fast, it's very important that you have Wi-Fi that can overdo.
That extra 34 is...
So with 3 bands, it's got two traditional Wi-Fi ones kind of dedicated for Wi-Fi and one band that is dedicated for the router-to-router communication that sets up the mesh. 3-pack is $399, as we said, and there's a less expensive one coming out later for about $100 less that only has the 2 bands. So it may not have the performance characteristics of this one, and you may not need them, but it'll be $299 rather than $399.
Yeah, so very similar form factor to a bunch of these that we've seen. And Seth, I've said it before. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a couple of months ago, or maybe a little bit longer, we're talking about one of these entrants, and we realized that we very much needed to shift away from calling this any sort of a trend or a hot new category or something. This is really, I think, becoming the norm for anyone in the Wi-Fi business. That mesh form factor right around that, who knows, I think we've seen them around 300, maybe at the low end, up to 5 or maybe a little bit more, but they're all I think generally in that sub $500 range, and for a 3-pack. And I really love these. I think it's a great form factor. If you've got a small home, you may not need them, but especially you start talking about homes up over maybe that 2,500 or 3,000 square feet, router down in the basement type of thing. These mesh Wi-Fi products are they're great. They're fantastic, and the price point is right. I think this has really been a boon for consumers.
Right. And the secret behind all this stuff that nobody really talks about is all of these routers are based on the same chipsets. Like there's manufacturers that make the little chips inside these things, and there's only a couple of them. And when they release these new features, everybody takes advantage of them. And you can kind of see that progressively happening out. We knew this from like a couple of years back, probably a decade ago now. Those WRT routers that Linksys had, they were the blue ones with the little 2 antennas on the back. They had like half blue and gray in the back. Very recognizable router, but you could like reflash the firmware on those, plus a ton of other routers, because they all had the same chips inside. So if somebody figured out that it was the same chip, you could update the firmware and hack the current firmware, replace it with your own new firmware. And that's how we got like Tomato routers and what's the other one? I can't remember it off the top of my head, but for a while there were people that were going, DDWRT. They were going out and flashing their custom firmware on there and activating features that manufacturers turned off on some of the chipsets. So you could get like
interesting.
They would turn off like say they turned off like more than one wireless network. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but you go in and turn that on, and then you'd have the ability to do a guest network plus your Wi-Fi network on the same little tiny $100 router. Those days have kind of come and gone, but still the idea is there, and it's the same idea. All the chipsets remain the same, and you start seeing the companies progressively rolling out what essentially is going to be the same product. Some of them are implemented better than others, and some of them, at the end of the day, we're going to have mesh networks is going to be the basic table stakes for wireless networking anymore. I don't think there's any reason to think otherwise. That we'll be going to like a traditional one access point in the house system, and doing anything other than having 3 random little devices plugged in around your house, one of them plugged into the internet and broadcasting out to the other 2, and those other 2 rebroadcasting and creating a big mesh network in the house. I really do think that's the way we can take a step back and look at how these Wi-Fi systems are designed. I think that's really how we all, as a community of integrators and people that are enthusiastic about home technology, that's how wireless networks are going to be designed moving forward. It's not going to be one central antenna. It's going to be a bunch of antennas, and they're all going to talk to each other.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, let's move on here. Fairly big story, although it's really, I don't want to say speculation, but it's not real quite yet. But Sigma Designs, owner of Z-Wave, of course, has it looks like they've commissioned Deutsche Bank Securities to, quote, assist in exploration of strategic alternatives to enhance stockholder value. Now, Julie Jacobson wrote about this at CE Pro. That's obviously a mouthful. What it really boils down to is it looks like Sigma Designs may be looking to spin off or sell Z-Wave, elsewhere, and fairly big story. I think Z-Wave is a huge technology. It's installed in a ton of smart homes. It's been around forever, but I think it's always been one of the things about Z-Wave that people talk about, and I don't really pretend to know what all the implications are of it. But there's not a lot of chip makers out there for it. I think Sigma is either the only one.
I think they're the only
maybe,
one. Yeah,
maybe one of two or something, but maybe the only one. And so does that expose you to some sort of risk as a manufacturer, perhaps, or even an end user? But Sigma's, their business is bifurcated. They're in the set-top box business, which is really I think their main line of business, and I guess some IoT devices is what the story says here. And so where Z-Wave fits into that is a little bit, I guess, a little bit awkward. Julie's got a funny graphic on the story. You'll have to go click through and see. One of these things is not like the other.
Lord, yes.
What she put on there. But
what is she going to do now that Microsoft has deprecated Microsoft Paint?
Microsoft. She's going to have to learn Photoshop.
She's going to have to learn a new tool. Yeah, that's funny. I say that with I love seeing her. Yeah, you open up a story, and if it's got a horrible Photoshop, you're like, this is Julie's story.
You scroll down, and
it's
the
got
picture
her
at the top is Don Draper with a broken heart, pink heart, with Sigma and Z-Wave. It's pretty funny, actually. If you haven't seen it, you got to go.
Yep,
got to go take a look at it. But the story does conclude. It says Sigma has indicated it's not decided whether it will enter into a transaction. So this is all sort of exploratory, I think, is the best word for it.
Yep, I mean, it's speculation at this point to say anything otherwise. It is that Z-Wave is kind of outside the bounds of what Sigma looks like they do, but I got to think that Z-Wave is probably a good part of their business too. So I don't know. We'll see where this goes. It would be interesting to see Z-Wave kind of spun off as another company, and who knows what that means for the system. I still think Z-Wave has a lot of legs behind it. I mean, there's definitely a lot of industry support from DIY to professional security systems. I mean, Z-Wave is out there and making inroads into the home automation market still. So I got to say, I'm curious to see where this goes, and I hope it works out for the best, because Z-Wave is still one of the better systems out there for home automation.
It's a workhorse, definitely. Another big business story here. We're following off the back of that. It looks like ADT could potentially go public in an IPO. This is we're reading. This is another one we're reading from CE Pro, but this comes via the Wall Street Journal. Reported a private equity firm, Apollo Global Management, which acquired ADT not that long ago, early 2016, for $7 billion. That was a big story. Looks like they're preparing an IPO for the security giant, and they're looking at a $15 billion plus valuation. So swinging for the fences there.
Right, $7 billion to $15 billion.
They doubled it.
That's
in
a
like
pretty
a year.
Good return, right? What's interesting is ADT was owned by Tyco before, I believe, and they were purchased by this Apollo Global. I remember when all this kind of went down. I know we talked about it on the show because it was like at the same time there were a number of other like high level acquisitions of companies back in 2016. So I know that we talked about it, but man, they're really. I don't know that the same company is worth a little more than double at this point. I mean, what have they added? What have they added to their company that justifies going from $7 billion to $15 billion? That's kind of questionable.
Yeah. I am not sure. It's a very good question, but I don't pretend to know how these things work at all. It does look like, I think they're saying potentially, so this was anonymous sources, speaking of the Wall Street Journal, that's worth mentioning, said it could go public by the end of 2018, potentially. Obviously, timing with these things, I think, is very sensitive. They try to time it with the market, and obviously don't want to do that right when the market's crashing or something. But there were some interesting statistics, actually, that were pulled out of here. Joey, who I work with, was in the hub. We were talking about this. Joey's obviously the founder of One Vision. We've had him on the show a couple of times, and he mentioned that if you click through the story, if you go to CE Pro, there's a thing at the bottom that says this was originally posted in Security Sales and Integration, sister publication of CE Pro, and in that story, it says they answer ADT answers 99 point something, quoting there, 99 point something % of calls within 60 seconds. I think there were some other stats that presumably Joey pulled out of this same story. Average of 1.5 day wait on service calls. So nearly same day service. And, it's interesting. The parallels there aren't necessarily direct with a lot of home technology companies because they're primarily security. Of course, ADT does have Pulse, so they have gotten into the home automation space and they are playing in that arena. But those are some pretty quick service statistics, and I think it's a lot of people get into a dangerous game when you start talking about big companies and you work with big companies and you don't get the same great service. Well, I think those assertions are being questioned now, and really it comes down to technology companies like this are starting to raise the bar around what consumers are going to expect when it comes to technology support. And what does that mean for integrators who have traditionally really tried to keep people primarily within those business hours, right? And sort of offer night and weekend support on what I call a sort of a best effort basis. So some interesting implications there as well.
Yeah. I mean, those numbers are great. I mean, from any company, those numbers are great for, I can tell you, let's see, one of the companies I worked at, this was kind of coming off of 2006. We were always about a week to 2 weeks out on service calls. Mm-hmm. So if you had a TV down, like there wasn't much we could get to in between now and then. Security kind of took priority. So somebody had a security system that was not, going crazy. We could try and fit them in between somewhere to go disable it, and then maybe 2 weeks later come back and fix it. But the ideal situation was somebody would call in and we'd get them on the schedule within a week and a half.
Yeah.
The company I went to afterwards, we did a little bit better on service. We were within the same week, at least, if not the same day or two. And, we really tried to do that. We were more of a service oriented company rather than install. So, I got to say a day and a half is pretty awesome. And considering they had, I think I saw something in here, there were 42,000 installation service calls or service calls waiting to be serviced. That's a whole lot. I was trying to see in here. I thought I saw how many people they employed. It was like 20,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of operations and a lot of people to move around and cats to wrangle.
Yeah.
It's a little difficult to do. So good for them. Those numbers are great.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll be really interested to see how all of that plays out. This did. When we started getting into that conversation, it reminded me of a story I actually did for CE Pro. We'll point people to because I think there's some parallels there when it comes to big companies really getting into service. Obviously, ADT's been into service forever, but Amazon, story we've been talking about, and how they've really embraced the idea of DIFM, do it for me, and they're building up their own staff of kind of akin to a Geek Squad type of thing, where they're going to actually be going out and doing smart home installation. And I was sort of analyzing this piece and thinking about it. And one of the things that I think was sort of buried a little bit on Amazon's sort of in their message, if you go and you really dive in and go to the smart home services page, you start clicking around. I think there's a few interesting points there. One, first of all, Amazon Home Services has a ton of different things they provide. Everything from painting, landscaping, even TV hanging in home theater kind of stands off on its own, and they provide that through third-party companies. But there's a a category, which incidentally, there's a grid of all these categories. And at the top left-hand corner, very number one position is smart home services. And you click through on that one, and the page that you're greeted with looks completely different than all of the others. It's being provided through Amazon employees. And there's some really interesting messaging on that page. And one of the things I thought was interesting is a line that says, you're busy, we get it. That's why we're open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Every day of the week. So it's 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they're
Wow.
prominently advertising that. It's not, again, I go back to this idea of best effort service. I think that's what a lot of professionals have traditionally done. During business hours, obviously they're doing their thing, but on weekends and things like that, it's, if you have a big emergency, call me and we'll try to do something to get you taken care of, right? And that's a subtle but really, really important difference in my opinion. Like, are you willing to put it in writing? Are you willing to back it up? Is it on your website? Is it prominently displayed? Do consumers have to guess about it, or is it something that you're actually marketing as a saleable product? And so, I think there's a lot of this going on. MagCare, which, is Magnolia, obviously owned by Best Buy, nationwide company, had their service offering that they put out recently. And they had, the numbers are escaping me right now, but there was some interesting statistics and things that they were offering in there about service as well. So I think this really goes to a point of consumer expectations around home technology. And it's not an 8 to 5 business anymore, if it ever was one, but it's certainly not now.
Right. Yeah. I I'm thinking back. It's like, yeah, I worked 7 days a week.
Right.
But
you're putting out fires on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot. A lot of home technology professionals are working 7 days a week, right? But it's on sort of like, again, on that best ever basis.
Best effort. You're on your cell phone, doing a couple things here on the computer, and you're still trying to. We're small businesses. We're still trying to be with our families.
Yep, totally get it.
At night and on the weekends. Yeah. So, but Amazon is a big company, and they can hire people who will fill those slots and have no problem getting a paycheck and working on Saturdays and Sundays.
Right.
So,
and this is
interesting.
It's sort of shameless self-promotion here, right? But that's the value prop of One Vision. Like, that sort of the challenge with providing that sort of service is it's a scale issue. Like, if you are a small business, it's virtually impossible to do it without completely killing your work-life balance, right? But if you've got either like a dedicated company like a One Vision, or obviously the scale of a company like Amazon, clearly a very different ballgame at that point.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. This is I didn't notice that one little line there. It's like way down the page, but they do say 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week.
Yep.
And I can't say there are many service companies that are doing that. That's very interesting, and for it to be in the home technology realm, that's even more applicable to us, and what we talk about, that's even more interesting. Yeah. I guess. But wow, that's wild.
Definitely worth paying attention to. But let's shift gears here. We have a little follow up. We talked about net neutrality, I think a couple of weeks ago, and had a fairly extensive conversation about that. And Seth, you picked out this story here. It looks like somebody or I guess a number of people perhaps on Reddit were reporting that, and we got the story through techdirt.com, and it says Verizon apparently was throttling wireless customers without telling anybody. So users on Reddit, what was happening is they were noticing that when they streamed Netflix content and ran a speed test, their connections like all of a sudden dropped 10 megabytes per second. But if they used if they use like a VPN to mask their traffic and did the same thing, then all of a sudden, I guess their speeds would go back up to the full speeds of their mobile connections. That's how I was understanding the story, Seth? I don't know if you had a different take on that, or what really the takeaway is here that you were seeing.
No, I mean that's pretty much it. So they Netflix provides this little fast.com. Like, if you ever were curious about what's going on with the internet, fast.com. It's pretty easy to remember. It basically gives you your download speed. Doesn't do the upload like some of the like other speedtest.net and what's that Ookla thing that's out there. They'll do up and down, but this does basically how fast is the download speed from Netflix to your house. And it's a very good indication, like a very good way to figure out basically how good the Netflix service is working. If not just a basic like one shot, like, hey, how is my internet doing? I go in there every now and then and see that something's going on, and my internet is like doing 5 megabits a second. I'm paying for 90. And it's like, what the heck's going on here? I go reset something, and it's back up to 90. I just checked; it's 87 right now, which pretty good for this time of day on Comcast cable. But what they discovered is that they went to that. They noticed that the speeds were going down, like you were saying. The speeds went down, and they were. What ends up happening is they were trying to get 4K content on some of their mobile devices, and they weren't getting that. They were getting like 1080p or 1080p. So I guess if you're paying for the fast internet, you kind of expect to get it. And they weren't seeing that. So they started seeing that Verizon was throttling them down. And the way you do check that is you connect to a VPN, which puts your internet out somewhere else. Basically, how you get onto the internet, it kind of builds a direct tunnel out to another place. And you get off the internet over there, and you're using a different service provider altogether. They got their speeds back. So it means that Verizon was doing something. And then Verizon came out and said, "Oh yeah, we were just testing something, but it was a mistake. We turned that off." In light of all the things that are going on with the FCC right now, like what a heck of a test, right? Like definitely bad optics.
You think?
Yeah. So this is kind of like, no, Verizon doesn't want you to watch the big videos. They want you to watch the small videos, and that's what you're going to get. And yeah, you don't get really a choice unless you pay a little bit extra.
Pay to play.
Use those wheels a little bit more. The internet works better.
Oh, that's right. Well, that transitions into a small handful of stories here. We're gonna touch on pretty quickly related to the streaming video over the top market, which clearly is a topic we've been talking a lot about lately. Number one here, Facebook. First wave of original TV shows rumored to be almost ready. There were rumors circling about, original programming from Facebook potentially showing up back in June. Of course, as we sit here and record this show, it's now late July. We still don't have anything, but I guess Bloomberg is reporting that their new video section is finally going to go online mid-August. So they've reportedly teamed up with, several media companies to do sort of short, kind of inexpensive shows, that shorter form factor, and then also big budget production. So it'll be really interesting to see, original programming is, we were just talking about Netflix, and they were really, I think, the pioneer there when it comes to going outside of the traditional production companies and doing that. And now, of course, you've got Amazon doing it. Looks like Facebook might get into it. Apple, there's been a little bit of talk about, maybe they might do something there. And it's interesting. I think Netflix, they do a fantastic job. Some of their original programming is, those were some of our favorite TV shows back when my wife and I actually had time to watch TV shows.
You're right. I remember those days.
Fondly.
Yeah, I remember those days. We're trying to catch up on a couple of shows right now. We're sadly not even watching Game of Thrones, which is like sacrilegious in this.
We watched episode 1 like maybe 5 or 6 days ago, and by about 2/3 of the way through, I was asleep on the couch. It's a true story.
We're like flipping through. Right now, we're thinking about canceling Stars because we don't really use it. But there's one show that we want to watch on it. It's an original production, actually, the American Gods thing, the Neil Gaiman book that has been adapted. We both wanted to see that. It's like, when are we going to have time for this? So I guess that's never going to be like, we want to cancel Stars and then use that money to pay for Game of Thrones, HBO Go or HBO Now. And it's like, well, we'll do that whenever we watch this. And we totally don't have any time to watch anything anymore. I don't know how you do it with two.
Someday.
I don't know how you, I don't know how
you don't
watch anything. So just throw the TVs away at that point.
Yeah, it's tough. Couple other top line stories here we'll touch on. Looks like Apple has added several new universal search options. So they've got that universal search function that they rolled out, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, something along those lines. And, none of these are really particularly big names. Looks like AHC, fairly large one. Destination America, clearly have heard of that. Discovery Life, Filmstruck, Shudder, Sundance Now, and Velocity Go. So some smaller names there, but anything I think they can get rolled into that universal search is good for them. I'm a believer in that functionality. I think that's the way ultimately all this stuff needs to go, where you don't have a bunch of segmented different apps. You just have a device and you can say or type in what you want to watch, and it goes out to whatever different services you're subscribed to and lets you know where you can find that and what your options are. So good to see them getting a little bit of traction there. I'm not sure where they're at in terms of the number of participants playing nice with that universal search now, but like I said, good to see.
Yeah, definitely. I've used that search thing in the TV app, and it's, I don't know, it's like if I don't have, it's like hit or miss. Like, I don't want to pay what I need to pay for the TV shows. Like, those I'll just get off a subscription somewhere. So I don't know, like it's hit or miss. Like it's a search, you get all the results, and whether they're relevant to you or not, it's up for you to figure out and filter out like what you want to watch out of that. Right now we're pretty happy with just paying for the subscription services and, going into those and figuring out what we want to watch. I would like to see this applied to maybe like a service like Plex or something. That would be cool. Like we've been using the heck out of that because I've gotten about half of my Blu-rays loaded into this thing. Let me see how many that is right now. Open up. Got a bunch of movies added in over the weekend and last week. 117. I'm only, I'd say halfway. I'm probably a third of the way, because there's a lot more that are like tucked away, that are those compilation things where there's like multiple discs in one. So I've got a ways to go, but man, I'm really falling in love with this app. You go into your TV.
Heard great things.
It's amazing. We've used my experience with media servers has really been basically Kaleidoscape, and I think this blows it out of the water. Other than having to rip your own media, like Kaleidoscape kind of had that down. Like, that was good about Kaleidoscape. But if you can get your own media copied and backed up or whatever into some form of playable movie, which there's plenty of instructions out there how to do with a couple of programs you can download. It's pretty straightforward. You drop them into this thing, it scans, it gets the right cover art. You can go in and correct the cover art if you want. And the Apple TV app looks exactly like the Apple Movies app. Like, if you go to buy a movie on iTunes and inside the Apple TV, it looks exactly like that on Plex. Like, it's freaky. Like, sometimes I don't even know I'm in the Plex app, because I'm kind of going around like, oh yeah, we're in our thing right now. I was going to search for some Apple movie that I don't have. But yeah, it's like they have done such a great job on that. And my wife the other day, she's like, okay, when are you going to do the rest? I'm like, oh God, it just takes forever.
Well, that's a good sign.
Yeah. So like 117 discs down. I've got a little bit more to go, but pretty happy about that. That's a milestone for me. That's a pretty definitely. Good project.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Well, I think last story here we're going to touch on just very quickly, Hulu's live TV service. Now available on Amazon Fire TV. So it looks like when this originally launched not too long ago, looks like, let me see here, it was available Apple TV, Xbox One, iOS and Android mobile devices, and Chromecast. So welcome news for Amazon Fire TV users. Like I've said before, I think Hulu's offering is looking pretty compelling, given the amount of on-demand content they've got now paired with this live TV offering of theirs. I think they're in a nice position. So the more devices we see it on, clearly the better.
Yep. I talked to somebody the other day, and I asked them what they were using, and they said Fire TVs only. That's all we use. They're so inexpensive. I just plug it in. It's got all the stuff on there that I want. And this would be a good addition for something, if they're not getting live TV out of the way, this will be a good addition for them. I've never, Jason, I think I've seen one Fire TV in my career, and it was probably like the first one.
Yeah.
But I've never used one of these things. I probably I know they're inexpensive. I think you can get the Fire Stick for just a few dollars. I want to say it's like under $100.
Yeah. Oh, they're dirt cheap. I don't even know what they are, but commodity hardware without a question. So definitely a very, very inexpensive way to get set up, and sounds like they're rounding out their offering. I'm not sure, what the comprehensive list of streaming services are that are available on that device now, but gosh, at that price point, really you can't miss.
Yeah, the Fire TV Stick with the the voice remote. That is $39 with free Prime shipping.
Wow.
So I can have this
Crazy.
thing by Friday, July 28th, if I order within the next 3 hours and 11 minutes. we're all at about exact numbers.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, well, I think that's a good place now to transition into our interview. Once again, we have David Millsaps on. This is an extension of our project. If you're not familiar with that, if you've got any sort of home technology project, either that you're a professional and you've done for a client, or you're an enthusiast and you've done in your own home that is particularly interesting, or you want to share it with us, I think HomeTech.fm/projects, right, Seth?
Yep, that's it.
That's the way to submit that. So that's how David did this, submitted a really interesting project, and we enjoyed our conversation with him tremendously, and we hope you do too. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey, David, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Jason. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to come on and join us. You submitted an entry to our project that was really a great detailed summary, and I know we were looking through that list and wanting to get re-engaged with some of those people who were kind enough to take the time to do that, and you were right there at the top of that list. So we really look forward to diving in and discussing what you've got going on with your technology. I think it'll make for a fun episode. But before we get into that, why don't you give our listeners just a little bit of a personal background, an introduction?
Yeah. So thank you. My name is David Millsaps, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a small family and a 1,700 square foot home. We had a baby last year around August, and at the same time we were doing a renovation on our home. During that renovation, I was wanted to kind of upgrade my smart home stuff, right? So I had been playing with Vera and Smart Things and some things like that, and I was kind of like, well, I want to get a little more serious about some of the components here. And during that research, that's how I trying to kind of step it up, I found your show, right? And I think I consumed like all of the first, it was around episode 90 or something like that. And I listened to all of your entire archive.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I was kind of had a Twitter conversation with Seth, and I guess I had some dumb questions about Sonos. So that's where the Sonos episode that you guys did came from. So
that's right.
Yeah. And then I guess professionally, I've worked as a software designer. So, really focused on user interface, and these days I'm focused on more than just interface, but that's been a constant in my career, and I love that kind of crossover with the home automation stuff.
Very cool. So a baby and a home renovation at the same time. That's brave.
Oh yeah.
I think both of you were having children last summer too. So.
Yeah. In fact, we were just talking about that before we hit record here tonight, and it definitely is tough when you're into smart home stuff and you want to get these projects going, especially if it's part of a larger renovation, and trying to balance that with family, of course, can be difficult. So your current interest in the smart home, then, for anyone who's wondering, really, you're not working in it by trade, but you would presumably classify yourself as like an enthusiast, or maybe even like a prosumer, right?
Yeah. I think prosumer is definitely flattering, because I definitely lack some of the skills that I think, or a lot of the skills that pros have. But I think I had an interest in the pro gear. So one of the things during the renovation, basically, I was kind of talking to my wife, and I was showing her these different systems that I was interested in. So it kind of started with audio. And I'm like, well, I want a wall control, right? I want to be able to start and stop the audio easily. And this is, last year, a ton has changed in the last 12 months. So there was no Alexa control of Sonos. There was no, there just wasn't, so much has changed in the last 12 months. And my wife is like, a keypad on the wall. She's like, that's hideous, but I really wanted that control. And then, so that's kind of, I was asking Seth, like, hey, what do you think of, I can't remember what some of the big guys, other products, whole house audio products and things like that. And Denon had the Hios product.
Hios.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I started looking at those, and then basically where I came down to with it was I did a matrix of, this is before you guys were talking about GAFA, but I kind of did a matrix on what platforms I thought would have future compatibility with HomeKit, with Alexa. Another thing was my wife hated, we had Z-Wave switches, right? And she always complained.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's a commercial interior designer, and she always complained about the aesthetic. And then on some of her commercial jobs, she has these high-end integrators that she's working alongside. And so she really started challenging my skills. She was like, do I need to call, Brian at so-and-so? And I was getting really, really insulted. And so I guess I just got obsessed with how pro can I get, And so I decided to do Radio Raw 2, Lutron's system, with the hope. They had just announced HomeKit for their consumer system, which I forget the name of, but the Radio Raw 2 fit and finish was just so, it lived up to my wife's standards. It had some keypad options, which a lot of the platforms out there didn't, because I knew I wanted keypads basically. And I was considering Insteon for a while, but the reliability on the Insteon switches just seems problematic. At least from the reviews I've read, and the fit and finish wasn't at the level of the Lutron product. So to do Radio Raw 2 as a consumer, you have to pass a test with Lutron, right? So I did their little training class and passed the test. And it's actually pretty in depth, and I understand why they make you do that, especially with today's lighting technologies. Our renovation involved a ton of new LED fixtures. And man, I had to use their whole the switches look the same, but the wiring, the brains behind them is totally different depending on the type of LED device and the load. So that training was really valuable.
Yeah, without question. It is, as anyone who's really dove into lighting control before, but especially the professionals in the audience are all nodding their heads right now as they're listening to that. And it is it can be the bane of their existence sometimes on these larger projects where you've got, hundreds of circuits of light in a home and a homeowner who wants every one of them on the control system, and perhaps a lighting designer or an electrician or somebody who doesn't quite grasp that level of complexity and the detail that's actually needed to make it even work, right? It's not about being nitpicky. It's about, well, if you want it to actually dim properly, you need to know exactly what type of dimming it is, and there's forward phase and reverse phase, and you get into all these. You start peeling back the layers of it, and it gets pretty complex in a hurry. So let's stick on lighting control for a minute, because I think it's such a great category. It's definitely one of my favorite categories in the smart home, and you talked a little bit about the decision from a fit and finish standpoint to go with Radio Raw 2. You mentioned when you did your submittal to us the software and the customization that's possible in Radio Raw 2, and that you were really a big fan of that. So elaborate on that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I forgot about that. It is it's a Windows software, which is kind of a pain for me. It doesn't run really well on a VM. So you really need a Windows box. I had to learn that the hard way. So like I was running it on my Mac and a VM, and then when I was trying to finally make it work, I'm like, what the hell's going on?
I will say that Lutron does have some tech notes on that, and like they will actually point you in that direction. And I think if I remember correctly, those tech notes did work for me. So just
good.
Yeah, there's a way to do it, and it can be done. I'll have to go back and look where I went to get those, but there's a way. They know that there's some kind of weird. Really, where it is where you like have the deployment. Like you get everything done and you're ready to like find the unit and hit deploy, and it's like I can't find a unit on this network.
Right.
What are you talking about? So it's something to do with networking, and they have a tech note on that. You may go into this, you may not, but Lutron does have a really good tech support, and
it's amazing.
Yeah. I find that anything that I run into with those guys, I pick 24/7. You can pick up the phone and talk to them. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, it comes at a premium price, but for somebody like me, not for your customers, but I think that supporting an American company like that, like I'm just somebody that. When I buy something that I'm going to use all the time, I try to get the highest quality I can, and I love being able to buy American. So, that company's incredible. They do some weird things. I will admit they do some weird things with this classification that I have, as far as I forget the exact certification I have, but so like they came out with their new bridge. I want to say it was the beginning of this year that enabled HomeKit, right? And I was like patiently waiting for that thing. Well, I think they still haven't released the software that allows you to set that bridge up for my level of certification. And I think it's just like a miss on their part. All of their website stuff is sort of aging. But that software, that should be the gold standard for how you set up systems like this. I mean, it actually reminds me of how you set up a Harmony remote or something like that. Like having a desktop application to set something up that's extremely complicated and then loading it onto some hardware. That's just a really nice workflow.
I'd agree. I know there are a lot of probably integrators in the audience going, "What's he talking about?" But like it actually, if you take a step back and look at everything that you have that there is to offer, from complete do-it-yourself systems to Insteon to Control4, like every one of these other like devices, the step-by-step like hold your hand walk through pace that the Lutron software tries to do. For the Raw 2 stuff in particular, that's a really good way to go ahead and set up a system. It makes it easy.
Yeah, well, I was able to design it. So like while the house was under renovation, I was able to design the whole system, before it was actually set up. So that was awesome. So I that whole experience, and then with this new bridge in the spring, they added HomeKit and they also added Sonos integration, right? So like, I think that's kind of indicative of to me of where things are going. David Weinberger talks about on the internet that like the internet is built on the idea that small pieces loosely joined. And to me, that's kind of where home technology is going. Like suddenly with Radio Raw being able to talk to Sonos, like I don't have to use an automation hub between the two, right? I have because they just sort of have tacit compatibility. And I think when you like looking back, just like picking kind of the market leaders in each category is the only reason that ever happened. Because everybody's like, well, we've got to integrate with Sonos. We've got to, Sonos can be criticized on a lot of levels, but at least everybody integrates with them, right? Like they say their voice control with Alexa is coming or whatever, but I've got the Harmony, I've got Sonos, I've got Alexa. I can voice control Sonos with my Alexa now. So I think all of that's kind of interesting. And those are all like little just individual point solutions, but they work together really well.
Right. Yeah. So let's take a step back. You did say you started with audio. That's where you started this planning from.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned Sonos a couple of times. I know that I did the show, and I think you said in your letter that made you decide to go with Sonos. I wasn't trying to do that advertisement for Sonos, but there was a lot of questions going on.
Did you ever get your commission check?
Yeah, I don't know. They said it was in the mail. I should have done something with that.
So yeah, let me give you a little more about that, because it wasn't like the information in the show is super valuable, and I enjoy going in depth technically for sure. But you know what? I'm never going to use Sonos for surround sound, right? I have a real AV setup there and things like that. I'm only using Sonos Connects. But it was your confidence as someone that works in the industry, like your vote of confidence, that is really what won me over, right? That like somebody legitimate is like, hey, this is because to me, it's like a little, as an outsider, I'm like, well, I don't want Sonos speakers. I just want Sonos phone UI, right? I want Sonos integration with other platforms. I do not want, I'm pretty serious about my audio. I didn't want their speakers. So it was your vote of confidence that really won me over.
Oh, well, you hear that, Sonos? It's in that check now. No, that's good.
I'm curious. I want to ask a really quick question here. Sorry, Seth, I didn't mean to cut you off, because I remember often having conversations when I was working on the install side not long ago with clients who were not aware of the Sonos Connect. And I think on the inside, I found that very surprising. People, I think a lot of consumers associate Sonos with the Play 3, the Play 5, the Play 1, where the speaker is, part and parcel of the device itself. I'm curious. You sound fairly savvy, so you may have known going into it, but were you aware at the outset of the existence of that Connect family?
Yeah. To me, it seemed a little redundant, right? Because they're all in a rack with a 12-channel amp in my closet here. So I was like, well, that's a little redundant to have that hardware. And that's kind of why I was looking at the Denon solution and the I'm trying to remember the other product. What's the Legrand? They have an audio
Nuvo.
Yeah. So I was looking at Nuvo, but man, and I just kept calling the techs at Nuvo and just being like, are you guys innovating? Like, is this app as dead as it looks like it is in the App Store? Right. And that was what made me scared about Nuvo, because I realized like, well, the app is the main place you're going to be interfacing with it. And then, you know what? The other thing that got me with Sonos was Apple Music compatibility. So, we're an Apple household, and things just work better when you're an Apple household if you stick to Apple. So I was like, man, who's going to get that compatibility? And Sonos announced that not too long after Seth's endorsement. So, and I do think their app probably has the best user experience from all those different products. I mean, I've looked in depth at the Hios when I did the demo at the audio store, and they haven't caught up yet.
Yeah, that's a very, very hard interface to nail. I think the older Sonos interface is a lot better than what you see them trying to do post what was it, iOS 6, that we had the major like minimal redesign on iOS, and everybody tried to like make buttons with no rectangles around them, and so everything was just text labels on there. And I see Sonos is kind of pulled back from, there's a lot of little design elements they put in to make their app usable, because before it certainly wasn't. But I see them at least still attempting to make the app better by throwing in little design elements here and there. And I think you're right. Out of all of them, if you go look at them, the Nuvo has a little drag and drop thing, which I think is really clever. But I think Sonos still kind of wins in a number of other ways. And then you have all the integrations that they do, like they have just everything. Besides, outside of like automation integrations, they have all sorts of music services that you can integrate with them. So I think it's a win from that respect too.
Well, When are they going to have a podcast solution though?
I don't know.
It's so frustrating because like we don't listen to the radio, but we listen to podcasts every day, and there's no good solution.
Yeah, I do know that some of the podcast apps are trying to have compatibility with them. I think I saw that the red one, whatever the red icon is, and I can't remember the name of it. That one had Sonos Integration, and I saw that Marco Arment was trying to get Overcast to talk to them. There's just not a very good, evidently there's not a very good API that Sonos has right now, but they're working on it from what he was saying. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is.
Cool. Well, yeah, sorry, Seth, I'll go ahead and jump in here. So we've talked about audio and lighting a little bit, and maybe we shift gears a little bit here. I know you mentioned surround sound and the control of the living room or the entertainment room is a topic that we touch on occasionally here on the podcast, but I think it gets lost a little bit in all of the buzz around the smart home and lighting and temperature control and all of these other categories. So walk us through what you've got in terms of living room entertainment. I believe you said you're using a Harmony to control that. So, maybe give us a quick overview there.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard you guys discuss Harmony and the merits of it. And I know in your world, there are some superior technologies, but, as a home user, it's almost the only option. Especially if you need to do things like with no line of sight, which is how our setup works. It's pretty simple. I've got a pretty serious receiver and a couple devices plugged into it, but mainly we just use the Apple TV, right? I mean, and then there's a 5.1 setup in our main living room, and our house is too small to have any kind of theater or anything. When the electricians were running wires, I ran a ton of, based on hearing you guys talk and plenty of other sources, I ran Cat 5 like crazy. But I'm not using any of it because we don't watch TV in our bedroom or have a desire to put it there, but I still ran the wires just in case. I'm using, so mainly it's just one room, but that Harmony does a lot of other things. Like I mentioned earlier, it has Alexa integration. And so in the bedroom or the kitchen, I have specific Alexa commands that will turn on that Sonos device in that room. So I think changing channels or something on Sonos with voice control is kind of, you could do it, but it would be pretty clunky. But turning it on is pretty, like in the morning, you're making coffee and you want to listen to NPR or something. That's nice with voice control. So I like the Harmony product for the most part. And it gives me a lot. We also have a media PC and the Harmony control interfaces with that too. There's an IR receiver on that media PC. But again, I mean, for most things, I'm using that Apple TV just because of ease of use and it has all those platforms. I mean, streaming is just changing everything. Everything is just in such a state of flux. So I guess when I was making a lot of these decisions, I'm always just trying to say what's not going to, or what's still going to be relevant. And I wonder how threatened Sonos is, right? It seems like Sonos is pretty threatened at this point. Whereas a year ago, I was confident that they would be around forever. Yeah,
it's interesting. And we've sort of tap danced around that conversation on a number of occasions. And obviously it's anyone's guess. Personally, my gut feeling is I'd be surprised to see them disappear entirely, at least anytime soon. I know people have speculated about an acquisition, but who knows? I think generally speaking, from the products I've seen on your roster here, you did a good job, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, of sort of, I guess, future proofing to the extent that you can in the smart home. That's always that's always a tough thing to do. But you mentioned voice control there, and we haven't really talked about that specifically. It's come up in a couple of different contexts, but it sounds like you're using Echo for your home, and maybe give us an overview of your thoughts there. What are some of the general control functions that you're typically using on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, our house is like really minimal, so we don't have any clocks or anything. So my wife is always asking Echo what the time is and other kinds, and what the weather is. So those are like self-contained sort of Echo functions. But there's other things too. So now with Radio Raw 2 supporting it, I use it directly for lighting, and then we also use HomeKit. So Siri, I'll use that too. But really, just for I like voice control for like turning off all the lights, right? That to me, that's like a very effective use of voice control. I'm not big on I hardly ever tell it to turn on a light, and I never dim a light with voice control, right? It doesn't even occur to me. Some other things that I've experimented with, so I do have like a Haas running on a Mac, and it will kind of allow you to use Alexa commands to do all kinds of things. I can have it go into vacation mode. So since I don't have a Control 4 system or something, there's not a legitimate vacation mode. There's just sort of in every system has its own thing. So using Haas, I can tell the Echo Bee thermostat to go into vacation mode, turn the air conditioner way up, put the Radio Raw 2 in the away mode. I actually have a Rheem water heater, and they have a connected module, and somebody wrote the first version of driver for Home Assistant. So that vacation mode also turns the water heater off. So that's all just kind of fun with voice control. But I really think it's only fun, or it only really works for things that you need immediately. So when I go in the morning, I got to make coffee and breakfast and everything, I usually ask it to turn on the radio. That's probably my most common use.
And this is Haas, right? Like home automation assistant. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. Well. Yeah. I'm just talking about using voice control in general. But that vacation mode and everything is enabled by Home Assistant, right? But I'm turning it on with Alexa.
Okay. So Home Assistant is one of the ones I ran across when we were looking at this data DIY. I want to say a couple of years ago. I kind of plan on doing it every year, but I just haven't gotten around to doing that research again. And yeah, we'll definitely get back to it. But honestly, a lot hadn't changed since we did that episode, especially around these do-it-yourself, completely from scratch do-it-yourself software. Oh,
it's hard.
Yeah. So you said you're in the software world, and Home Assistant or Haas, that was one of the trickiest ones. You really had to know how to do code. You had to get in there just to even configure and set it up. So I'm curious what you feel about it after the setup, what exactly you're using it for, and then how. Is anybody else in the house using Home Assistant, or is it just something that you're using to kind of tie a couple of things together?
Yeah, a lot of it is just me playing around with it. I thought your first project guest, that electrician, that guy was brilliant. And when he was, he really resonated with me when he was saying he enjoys conceiving and kind of executing on these projects more than necessarily using them. Mm-hmm. Right. So I find that same joy, right? Designing all this equipment and figuring out the wiring and picking the products and getting them in and making them work. That's by far the most exciting part. So Home Assistant is extremely challenging. I would be nowhere without there's a bunch of YouTube videos out there that didn't come out until last year. And without that kind of hand holding, I probably never would have invested time into it. It's extremely frustrating. Like you said, all the configuration is done via YAML files. And if you mess the syntax up in those things, it's breaks the whole system. That said, once that thing is up and running, and if you configure something, it's extremely stable, right? So I have it running on a Mac laptop, just closed in the closet, and that battery, so it kind of has a built-in UPS. It'll run for, I mean, it runs until I reboot it. It runs for 6 months. So that's pretty incredible. It has some good history. So it'll track every system that it integrates with. It tracks all the states. So you can review that later. One of the things I'm interested in is that it supports some basic facial recognition and optical character recognition on connected cameras, right? So there are guys that have it like recording every license plate that comes into their driveway into a spreadsheet.
Of course.
Or like, yeah, or like, turning their man cave on if it's them that's walking down the hall, or stuff like that. So like, Home Assistant is really fun to play with, but it's not, it is painful. It's also the only way I can interface with that hot water heater.
Right. So you mentioned at the top, you've got a family there. How is the spouse acceptance factor? You mentioned your wife is also a professional interior design.
Yeah.
How is the rest of the family getting along with the technology that you've imposed on them?
Well, okay, for instance, like everything I do has to be invisible, right? So like Alexa, like the Echo Dots they're relatively hidden, right? And the first time she saw one, she was like, "What the hell is that?" Right? Put it, because we have a beautiful minimal kitchen, right? There's nothing, like almost everything is behind a door, except for like a few sculptural pottery and things like that. So, any device out pisses her off. And during construction, I had her agree to like let me put like a tablet in a central place, kind of in a hallway. But by the end of construction, I had heard you make fun of tablets on the wall so much, and I just realized like my phone's always in my pocket. Like why would I put a tablet on the wall? And I was even like, what's that beautiful Belgian company that makes like the
salt.
Yes. Okay. So I like had quotes from them, and I was ready to order their unit for it. And then I'm like, this is so stupid. I'm going to spend more than the iPad on the container, and then it's just going to be glued to the wall, and I'm never going to use it because my phone's in my pocket. So, like I said before, things are changing fast. Like I have all this Cat 5 in the wall. I'm using it for a single PoE camera right now. And I'm about to install a Wi-Fi access point on one end of the house, and that's it. Like I'm not using that Cat 5 for anything. And I ran the whole 1,000-foot spool. Like I ran 5 to where I thought we would put a TV in the bedroom, but because I was just trying to follow instructions. Like if you look, as far as DIY, Seth, I think the most interesting platform out there is CQC. I don't know if you've
Charm Cork. That's an oldie, but an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, it's old, but it's really cool, right? And so like their community influenced me, and I think if I was gonna like really double down on automation, that's like might be where I would go, because that's a strong community, but it's small. But the thing is, I think in a home my size, the thing I've really learned is like automation has very limited value when you have a small home. Like it's not, it would totally make sense to me if I lived in like, some 3 or 4 story McMansion or something somewhere, but we have a small home in town, and what am I going to automate? Right? Like, the lights turn themselves off in the middle of the day, and the floodlights turn themselves on, the motion lights turn themselves on automatically at the end of the day, and basic things like that. But like, I'm not doing like, I open the garage door and then my favorite music starts playing after work or anything like that. And it doesn't really interest me.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. And personally, that's kind of even being in the automation area, industry, and programming for automation systems, I'd say I'm kind of the same way. Although I do have little sensors on the garage door to, tell me when the garage door is open or closed, so I can tell, before I go to bed if the garage door is open or closed, because I can't tell you how many times you wake up in the morning, you step out, open the garage door, and you're just looking out into the world. It's not a good feeling.
I do have the reporting. Yeah, I do value I guess I value the information more than the idea of automation. But I didn't answer your question about the spouse. I tell you what, I drove her crazy originally with all this, trying to like take advantage of all of Radio Raw 2's features and scheduling and like hitting one button and, you know, having all these scenes and everything. Since then, I've calmed it down and made it more logical, thought more about the user experience, and she doesn't complain anymore. But initially, she was definitely like, what the hell is this?
Yep. That is I get it. A common complaint. Well, yeah, a lot of really interesting stuff there. I you know, you mentioned one thing you learned obviously there about maybe there's less value in the automation than you originally thought. And we're running tight on time here, but to close things out, you know, is there any other high level quick takeaways that you came away from this? Maybe things that surprised you when you got to the end of the project and just changed your way of thinking about home technology?
Well, I just think it's moving so much faster than it ever has before. You know, I got into it with like the basic DIY stuff in college, like a long time ago. I was messing with X10 and, you know, webcams hooked to scripts and things like that. And in the 15 years after that, not much changed really. And then it's just taken off in the last few years and it's changing so fast. You know, and I guess thank you guys so much for all the awesome conversation. I love, in particular, hearing you guys talk about the industry and how it's changing.
That's great. That's really great feedback. We appreciate it. And speaking of that, David, I know you and I have had a couple of really interesting interactions on Twitter, and be a good place to close it out here. If you were interested in connecting with anyone else in the audience who may be active on that platform, is there a good handle they can connect with you at?
Yes, please. So my Twitter handle is iVariety, EYEVARIETY. And I love talking about this stuff. I mean, I'm not a pro by any means, but I like talking to all the pros. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Bye.
Yep, thanks, David.